Shock. And typically along with that can be a great deal of denial. I not only can't believe it, I'm not going to believe it. I can't believe I've lost my loved one. I can't believe I had that accident. I can't believe the crisis of my domestic violence. I can't believe he hit me. I can't believe they touched me inappropriately. The shock, the denial, is often where we're called into it. Now again, when you come into that situation, recognize they need to process that through. They can't hold on to the shock forever, and they can't hold on to the denial forever. But once you kind of get past the shock and the denial, some of the real feelings, the real emotions begin to become evident. And again, as a crisis counselor, often you are the person that's going to take the brunt of that. And you have to be okay with that. That, listen, it's not personal. They're not dumping on you. They are expressing healthy emotion in the midst of their incredible loss. Often after they've first started to deal with the situation, they'll go through a stage of fantasy versus reality. They're not really sure what's true, what's possible, it's that confusion, the ambivalence that they have because of their loss. Again, often crisis counselors will be there to help. Again, we talked about the ABCD. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But the achieve relationship, boil down the problem. That's part of what you're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at that in greater detail in a moment. But you want to help people to deal with reality as soon as they can. The fourth stage then is just what I call grief relief, and that is where they finally release and express the emotions. And they need to have permission to express whatever emotions they have. There's no right or wrong ones. There are healthier expressions. And anger, remember, is often a secondary emotion that's presented when there's actually underneath that sadness or hurt or fear. And so whatever that is, you want to help them, encourage them to express the emotion, but not to be immobilized by it. Again, the goal is to help them get to a place where they can make some healthy decisions and begin to move forward with the crisis situation. But they're going to have to deal with their loss, and you might as well be aware of that as a crisis counselor. Ultimately, you're going to help them to begin to live with the memories, with the loss that they've experienced. Again, over time, people they're triggered by different things that have happened. They'll hear a song, they'll see a picture, they'll get a phone call from someone, and it just triggers memories. And some of those memories are sweet, and some of those memories can be quite problematic. In fact, we know in post-traumatic stress disorder that often what gets triggered are memories of the event that has so frightened them and so hurt them, the real crisis itself. And so again, what our goal is, maybe not in the middle of the crisis itself, but shortly thereafter, to help the person begin to deal with the memories so they can learn to live with them. Our ultimate goal is to see them be able to accept and affirm that, sometimes life stinks, but God is good, and life is good. So during that stage, they begin to accept the loss and affirm that life indeed goes on. Now, most of the time, as crisis counselors, we don't see this part. You might hear about it later. And when you do, you rejoice because, hey, they got through their crisis, they were able to get stabilized again, and they're able to move forward. And they've come to a healthy resolution. It breaks your heart when you find out that someone is still struggling through the fantasy versus reality, or they're still stuck in denial, or they're unable to live with the memories in a healthy way. But the goal is to see them get to the place where they can affirm that life is good. I can't change what happened. I can't fix it. But I know that I've gotten through it. And whether, again, faith affirmed, by God's help, or just they, believe in nature, whatever they believe in, at least they know they got through it and they can move on with their life. Well, the last section we want to talk about, the two things we want to cover. Number one is dealing with suicide. And then simply the ABCD, biblical, it's really both biblical as well as just an excellent crisis process. Now, when you're dealing with someone who you think might be suicidal, the goal is to keep them alive. I have people that to this day, I would pretty much guarantee you, still hate me because I made the phone call that got them taken to the hospital, and it's been years that they've been hating me. But I don't care, they're still alive. My goal was to make sure they didn't act on the impulse to hurt themselves. We know that suicide is ultimately an act of desperation. It's an act done by someone that's not, at least on a temporary basis, in their right mind. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Crisis counselors, we want to come alongside and help people not to take this ultimate step. When you think someone might be suicidal, the best way to find out, by the way, is to ask them. I've found most people are not going to lie about it. You know, have you been thinking about hurting yourself? Because of the loss, because of your crisis, have you thought about hurting yourself? And most of the time, they'll just say yes or no. Well, if it's a no, good. Well, if you do start to feel that way, think that way, please give me a call. Talk to me before you do it. I'm here to help you. If they say, well, yes, I've thought about it. Well, then you want to probe a little deeper. Well, have you thought about how you would do that? Oh, no, not really. Okay. Then the suicidal intent or suicidal ideation is much lower than it would be if someone said, again, yes, I've thought about how I would do it. Okay, well, how would you do it? Well, I would hang myself. Oh, do you have a rope? No. Yes, it's in the garage. And I keep picturing myself throwing it over a rafter and tying the noose and getting on a ladder. Again, the more descriptive, the more violent, the more likely they are to perhaps act on that. And so the more serious you want to take their intention. Now again, as a mental health professional, we're required, teachers, etc., we're required, if we think that someone is likely going to hurt themselves, we have a responsibility to report that. Now we're not reporting it to shame them, to punish them, but to help them, to keep them alive. That's the goal. We have a duty to warn if they're likely going to hurt someone else. Now, what we're looking for is to help them, and the best way is to listen and ask the questions necessary to get them to share what level of despair are they experiencing. I've been really blessed in my 40 years of counseling experience. I haven't lost anyone to suicide. I am very blessed. I'm very thankful for that. There's many people that I've sat down with and had them write out a contract with me, a promise not to commit suicide. Now, that's not a guarantee that someone's not going to act out, but for most people, it's kind of like a lock on a door doesn't keep a thief out, but it keeps the honest person honest. When someone is willing to write out, I promise I will not hurt myself until I call you, or whatever it is you tell them to do, and you maybe give them a suicide hotline number as well. When they sign that, most people will commit to it because they realize that they really don't want to die. They just want to be out of their pain. The pain is real. We empathize with the pain. So if you're dealing with the crisis of someone talking about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, you need to be alert to it. And you need to be ready to make a good referral to someone that can really step in and help in that situation. Well, again, we want to just look at this ABCD model. Again, we've talked about it before, but it's really important. Number one, again, is achieve a relationship. When you are called upon to step into a counseling situation, especially in a crisis, and especially with domestic violence cases, the first thing you want to do is develop a relationship. You want to express empathy, warmth, respect, and you need to come alongside enough to take some action with them. Okay? So the goal is to, build a relationship. Well, how do you do that? You do it by listening. You do it by your facial expression, your warmth, your care for them, your willingness just to be there, to, again, take some action for them where it's appropriate to do so. All of that begins to help. I mean, sometimes achieving a relationship helps when you have the right badge on, the right shirt on, the right business card. Those things can also help because it gives credibility. You are a caring person. That's why you're here. Therefore, I can assume I can trust you. It's kind of like, people go to see their MD and they start taking their clothes off. Talk about being vulnerable. But they're aware that, wait, my doctor is there to care and to help me with my medical condition. Some ways, when people come for therapy, they mentally start to undress. I mean, they start to talk about things you don't even want to know about. Well, that can happen also in the midst of a crisis situation. So the greater your credibility, the easier it is to build that relationship. But again, the goal is to build a relationship where people know that you're listening, you care, that you're beginning to develop understanding, or what we call simply a therapeutic relationship. The B then is boil down the problem. What's the problem? And again, many people have a hard time articulating what the real problem is. Some of it can be easily observed. So you don't have to boil it down too much. If they've had an auto accident, well, they need to make sure that the ambulance is coming and someone's going to be there to take care of them. Or someone's going to take care of their kids because they have to go to the hospital. So you boil down the real problem is the real concern at the moment. And you want to deal with first things first. And you want to deal with safety first. You know, safety is more important than your philosophy, than your theology, than your psychology. It's the most important thing, is to make sure the person is safe as much as possible. And then you want to be directive more than non-directive, usually in the beginning of a crisis. I mean, let me use this example. Police officers, fire department, they're very directive. You, move. They're not really asking, they're not always polite. In fact, they rarely are, because they're just controlling the situation. That's their job, take control of the situation. Well, as a crisis counselor, without being difficult and without being too demonstrative, you do want to be somewhat directive. Just sit down right here. I'm right here with you. Just sit down. It'll be okay. Just a minute. Let me help you sort this thing through. That's being much more directive. Versus non-directive with, what would you like to do? Well, most of the time they would like to be out of their situation. They might want to shoot somebody. I mean, they got all kinds of things going on in their head. So usually in the early stage of the crisis, being more directive is helpful, and then non-directive. In other words, you want to lead them into making healthy decisions that are going to help them move forward in the time of crisis. C is simply to challenge to action, and that starts with baby steps. You want to encourage them from being dependent to independent to interdependent. In other words, it's okay to be interdependent. To have people help you in the time of crisis is all right. But you don't want them to be completely dependent upon everybody else to take care of them. That's not healthy, and it's disrespectful. It's dishonoring, especially to an adult. We're not talking about for children, but for an adult. And they need to take some independent action. Maybe encouraged by you, but ultimately where they make decisions. And then you want to assist them, not baby them, but you want to assist them to take healthy action. And then develop an ongoing plan. I like to use these, I don't know what you call them, acrostic or something like that. Face, trace, erase, replace. That's good. You want to help them face the situation. Okay? Whatever it is, you got to face it. You got to look at it. You can't live in denial. Now again, you don't rub their nose in it. They're not a dog, but you do help them to face the truth. Then you can spend a little time tracing it. What happened? What caused it? And sometimes the cause is simple. It's very clear. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's not for then. It's maybe for the future. That they can really trace what led up to the situation that they find themselves in today. As we said, in most domestic violence cases, it's not a one-time thing. It's the one that finally took the person to the hospital. It's finally the one that made the person say, this is so crazy and so frightening, I have to call the police. So it's not the first, though. So you might have to help them eventually to trace the root of the problem, but maybe not on the day of the crisis, but sometime shortly thereafter, because they've probably, whether willingly or unwillingly, made some decisions that led them to the place where they were so vulnerable to be abused. Okay? Now this is reality. Again, not necessarily something that you talk about with them, but you have to recognize that there can be lots of roots, lots of decisions, lots of choices, lots of circumstances. We know that a large percentage of people that abuse people were abused as children. And probably their parents were abused before them. It is a multi-generational problem. And the goal is to stop it at least in this generation if we can possibly do so. So face, trace, erase is to deal with it. Somehow face the problems. Sometimes erase means I'm going to make the decision to no longer be a part of this relationship because it is so unhealthy, I can't stay with it. That is a decision. But erasing also speaks about dealing with the things that led up to it. Is there bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness and things of that nature that need to be faced and dealt with to be able to erase the possibility that they're likely going to repeat themselves again? And then replace with healthy ways of thinking and acting. Healthy ways of thinking and acting. It's amazing to me how many people, they come out of a bad marriage. What was bad about it? Well, my husband was an alcoholic. And who are you dating? Well, George. What's he do? Well, he works at a bar. He drinks pretty heavily, but I think it's going to be better this time. I mean, we'd like to just say, that's brain damage. It's not. It's part of the cycle that many people go through. So what we want to do is replace with healthy relationships, healthy ways of doing things. And sometimes that has to be modeled by others. That's why community organizations, support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., domestic violence support groups can make a huge difference in helping them make healthier decisions to replace the decisions they've made in the past. Another way is to admit, submit, and commit. You got to admit that though I may have had little or nothing to do with the accident, I'm here and I'm in the middle of it, and I admit this is my problem. And I have to be willing to submit to a process of making things different or change. And then commit to work out that process. Now, when you're dealing with crisis, you're coming on the scene in the midst of who knows what. You've gotten a call, maybe from the police department, maybe from a social service agency, a hospital, a school, and you're asked, so-and-so's in trouble, they've just experienced some loss, they really need someone to come alongside of them. Really, the greatest instrument to help people is you. It's your heart, it's your healthy attitude, it's your wit, it's your wisdom, it's your knowledge. All of those things help bring to the table what's necessary to assist the individual to work through the issues that they have in their life. I want to encourage you, keep studying. Hopefully you've taken the family violence course. If you haven't, that's maybe next. You're taking the crisis counseling course. You're doing all the other research necessary to become certified. Then you're going to be sent out in the field. And when you do, you'll make mistakes. You'll have problems. Issues will happen. That's all a part of the continued learning process. But in the middle of it, you're going to also find, I can really do this. I can really help people. And being able to help people is one of the greatest gifts that we can provide within the communities in which we serve. Thank you so much. Continue to study on.